Last week, we began at the beginning. Our first pass through the expanse of Earthbound was marked with introductions, first impressions, and modern-day thoughts. Throughout the episode, we examined how this game only gets better and richer with age. In the first part of this week's episode, we remember those big tentpole moments in a game filled to the brim with them. From wading behind a waterfall to walking amongst the dinosaurs, Earthbound has no shortage of special scenes. And in the back half of the show, we have a series of frank, honest, and hopefully balanced conversations about how Earthbound plays as an interactive experience. From ingenious gameplay decisions to frustrating mechanics, we ask, does the friction really matter when the experience is this good? Time to lace up our shoes, grab our backpack, and raid the local convenience store for beef jerky, piggy jelly, and calorie sticks as we journey into episode 85, Earthbound Part Twoson, Moments and Mechanics. Starting us off on our conversation about those big moments in Earthbound is Bram Stoker award-winning author Robert P. Atone, followed by Celeste of the Another Zelda podcast, Michael K. Hughes of the brand new Capes and Junk podcast, and then finally the wonderful and smashing Mike Albertin of Games My Mom Found. In a game full of standout moments, we've already talked about a bunch. Are there any standout moments that speak to you now as an adult? When you play it and when you think about it, we kind of talked a lot about being a kid, but what about now? Are there any moments where like, oh, okay, this is cool or meaningful, impactful?
I remember there's a couple little moments after the end game happens, after the game is defeated and, after Gygas is gone and peace is restored, whatever. I remember going, and these are just little things, but going back to the Tenda village and getting the book, Overcoming Shyness, and then returning the book to the library.
Ooh,
I remember doing a little thing like that, and the librarian gives you a kiss on the cheek. I remember, yeah, pretty cool, right? I remember,
yeah, super cool.
I remember doing that. I remember specifically wanting to walk Paula home because I felt that there was power in that moment. I didn't want to just like warp to her house. I wanted to take the time to walk her home because there was a connection between her and Ness, and I don't want to be like cheesy and be like, well, they're romantically linked. It was like sort of the beginnings of like first crush kind of stuff. And I remember how I was with my first crush, and I always walked her home. And I think back to doing that in the game, and it's really touching and really very sweet when she says goodbye to Ness in front of her house and she goes home. And then the very last thing that I did is because I had so much money from Dad, I bought the house that overlooked the viewpoint.
Yes.
So I was able to do that. And then I read like the weird novel that was in the drawer. But, just I love like end game stuff like that. And I love those like tender moments between characters where you really kind of see who they are, like walking her home or like saying goodbye to Jeff because Jeff stays in Saturn Valley with his dad and Pooh goes back home because he has to be a prince, and it's like,
right.
You don't know if you're ever going to see Pooh again necessarily, but you get the impression that you hope that they will see each other again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have that with a lot of our friends. I'm lucky to have a lot of the friends that I had since kindergarten. And,
oh, cool.
Yeah. So when I fired up my game the other day, my old save, I saw friends that I still talk to that I named after the characters. And that was like a really touching moment, and a really weird moment.
That's really touching. I love the fact you have such a personal connection to this game, and it was able to connect with you in a variety of different ways.
I remember, even as a child, when you bring Pokey and Picky back home to their house after they explore that meteorite that landed near your homes, it seems like their parents are not that fantastic. I think like they go spank them or beat them or something. And that struck me as a kid where you read the dialogue with Aloysius, I think is the dad's name, and I don't remember the mom's name.
That's fine. Yeah.
They went out on a date in the town, and they seemed to have more money than Ness's family, but they seem so miserable. And I picked up on that theme even as a child where, I don't think they have a happy life. And as an adult, I started to kind of wonder, is that what Pokey sought as he became attracted to Giagus? Was he susceptible to those promises because he wanted a happier life? He wasn't happy at home and he felt lonely. He kind of felt like he was being bullied, so he wanted to become the bully. And I think of that often. It's interesting to see what path people choose, because sometimes if you're bullied or you come from an abusive household, you continue the cycle and it's very sad, or people either make that decision or have a positive influence in their life who helps them move beyond that. So maybe that's a little too deep.
No, I think that's great. No, again, this is definitely the sort of thing I like exploring with games because people don't talk about it. That's 100% right. It's a really great point. I never thought of it that way. I obviously looked at it on its face where it's like, ooh, that's really kind of a gross behavior, but maybe that is something he was looking for. Maybe that was a search and he found that in this all-knowing deity, being. Yeah. And found connection where he wasn't feeling it at home. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I also, this is a humorous part. When I got to Summers, they call it the eternal tourist trap, and they poke fun at how expensive everything is whenever you go to a resort or you're going on vacation. You really just want to escape, but they hike up all the prices and commercialize it so much.
Love it. Yes.
I thought that was so funny.
What were some, though, big moments that always stick out to you? Because you mentioned when the meteor crashing, that was a moment. When I played it a couple of years ago, the big moment for me where I realized, this is different, is when, I don't want to call them the Blue Oyster Cult because that can't be that obvious, but the cult of blue hooded people, when you go to that town, I walked in there, it's like, this is going to be something different. This is cool. I really now dig this as opposed to just like an RPG, because I walked into it completely blind. I knew nothing about it walking into it.
Yeah, it's really cool how each area of the game has like its own self-contained story within the big story that you're putting together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you get into the Threed and it's covered in zombies and stuff. Everything. It's just eternally night, and then you get that I don't want to call her the stripper woman, but it's basically what she is, that lures you into the hotel and you get jumped by the zombies and wake up in the graveyard. It's so cool. It's such a cool little moment.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments too is when it's later on in the game when you end up in prehistoric times, but I think you end up really tiny. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well,
really tiny.
It has to make you look small to make the dinosaur enemies look that much bigger than you.
I love it. It's so funny. It's so clever and well done. There's all these great, you can just go on and on about the great moments in Earthbound. What do you think some of your favorite moments of Earthbound when you think back to it? It's full of those moments that it's full
the
of
Beatles songs I didn't realize were in it.
Oh,
because there's multiple Beatles songs that are chiptune that are straight up Beatles songs. The Blue Cult People. I've come I have more respect for that joke in there now.
The Blue Cult People. That's when the game. I forget. I can look it up. I have the power.
But I do remember the whole cult of blue people. I mean, there's a few different songs that are Beatles songs that are then transferred into chip tunes, but you really can't tell unless someone points it out. Like I'm like, oh, yep, that's a Beatles song.
I didn't catch that until someone mentioned it either. The Blue Cult there, the happyism is the religion in Earthbound of they're just known, I think, as insane cultists. Coming up next to talk about their favorite moments of Earthbound is Ian, aka TeacherBloke85 on Twitter, Rigney of the Reliving Retro podcast, creator of the read-only magazine Kyle VonKubick, and then finally Sam of the Retro Logic podcast. Have you played it relatively recently, or how many times have you gone through Earthbound?
Just the once back in 99.
Okay, wow, so
Yeah,
just the once, okay.
And it's stuck with me all that time. Some of the major plot points I'll never forget as long as I live. I did try to play Mother 3 briefly, but for some reason the emulator I was playing on decided to delete my save.
That's the end of that then. That's it. You're done. What were some of those memorable moments in the game that stick with you?
What were they called? The cute little people who speak in the curly font.
Mr. Saturn?
Yes, the Mr. Saturns. I love those. I definitely remember them and thinking, what is this strange font? Oh, it's legible. It is English. There was... Again, this is going back many, many years now, but there was a part where you hitched a ride with a giant statue.
Yes. Yeah, you could actually walk around as the statue.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, God, that's so strange. Yes. I love that.
It was. And the purple people, of course, the cult.
Interesting. Were they purple for you or they blue? Because I guess in the West, it was they were blue. Were they purple for you?
They must be blue then, because it's a NTSC copy that I've got, so they must be blue.
Okay, so yeah.
In my mind, they're purple. Maybe that's a Mandela effect thing. I don't know.
Perhaps. I don't know. Maybe I could be wrong, too. That was a moment when I played it. When I played it, I never played it as a kid, because I didn't... That came out in 95. I was like 15. I was playing Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger. Unfortunately, you were not. And I was kind of like, this like seems like a silly kid game. Like I was like, so I didn't want to engage in it. So first time I played it was a couple of years ago for the first time.
Oh,
yeah, and it was really interesting playing it as an adult, because I could see why kids would really dig it, and I see why adults really dig it, and both sides of the coin. I think it's a fascinating game. It's very interesting.
I can say for sure that there are a couple moments that are pretty much like ingrained into my head from when I was a child. One specifically is when you're trying to get behind a waterfall and it says wait for 3 minutes, and you're kind of just like, okay. Not really 3 minutes though, right? And the game's like, no, 3 minutes. Wait there. Just sit there.
It's so good.
For 3 minutes.
I love it.
And I remember as a kid being like so impatient, and to the point where like I kept just like trying to get in, and they're like, oh no, you messed up. And so I remember just leaving, just like leaving the room, and I'm like, it's got to be 3 minutes by now. And then I come back, and sure enough, it's like, yeah, you can go in. But that one always sticks out in my head. Some people hate that. I think because of just the frustration it left me as a kid, and looking back at it now, something I know going into it as an adult, it doesn't frustrate me anymore, because obviously like it's something I know about. So
yeah, right.
So it's not frustrating to me anymore, but I do know that a lot of people hate that. Two other moments that I would say that really have stuck with me. One is like the coffee break, like the major like coffee breaks that happen. They're just very fourth wall breaking, and they kind of just, they let you know like that, hey, like as a player, you're doing this. Like it's not just the characters in the game. Like you're a part of this. You're helping the characters. You know what I mean? Like so that just like breaking the fourth wall. This game does that the entire game, essentially. Just whether it's like NPCs or whoever you're talking to, tons of fourth wall breaking. I personally love that in video games. Some people don't like it because it takes away like the immersion, or like the immersiveness. I don't know what the word is. But it's less immersive, I guess, for some people. But I love it. I feel like it's not less immersive. I feel like it's more immersive. It's like, hey, come into this game with us. That's why we're breaking down the fourth wall, to let you in. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll come in.
And it serves a great game. And just real quick, it serves a great gameplay purpose too, because it kind of in RPGs especially, obviously a big problem with those games is sometimes the narrative thread gets lost because you're grinding, you're battling, you're buying things, and you're doing all the stuff. To kind of refocus where you're at, I think is really strong. I think it's a very smart way of doing it. And then again, in the context of this coffee break, we're just going to sit down with one of those weird alien dudes. I always forget their name.
Mr. Saturn.
Mr. Saturns, and just have a coffee break is really fun and good.
Yeah, it is. And during one part of the game, it asks you, it says you holding the controller, like, what is your name? So then I put in my name, Kyle.
Sure,
and,
of course.
And then I'm like, okay, what was that for? You know what I mean? And then you find out towards the end of the game, when Paul is praying, they ask you for help. They specifically reach out to the one holding the controller to pray and help the characters in the game. And I think that's huge. I don't think a lot of people really understand like that part of the game is just, I don't know, it's just so big. And then I would say another part, like another favorite from the game is when Pooh has to go through his training at the top of that mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And they first cut off his arms, and they cut off his legs, and then they they take away his vision, they take away his hearing, and just that whole sequence is a moment in gaming that will stick with me forever, I think.
Just to kind of move maybe to the more lighter side of things, though, which, again, I have no problem talking about the more intense emotional things. But this game is full of just really glorious humor and fourth wall breaking, like you said. Yeah. Are there any moments in this game from that side of the equation that really struck you? Or honestly, because there's a piece for me, is there a moment in Earthbound when you played it as an adult, because that's your fresher recollection, where it sunk in? You're like, okay, I kind of love this. Because there's so many big moments in this game. I was curious if there's one that that really cemented it. Like, okay, now I kind of really dig what this game's trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, I was into it because I liked the art style, which admittingly for the time was kind of dated. It didn't look as pretty as Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, but I liked the cartoony, like I said, Charles Schultz type of look about it. But as far as funny things are concerned, the things that hooked me were like having to actually wait and not touch your controller for an extended period of time.
Oh, man.
Using an eraser to erase an this game did benefit for having a pretty good localization so that the humor and quirkiness wasn't curtailed. Right. Or didn't feel foreign, because that was that happened a lot in this era, too, where it either felt too Japanese or somebody was making Bill Clinton jokes, about Socks the Cat in your RPG for some reason.
I mean, that's one of the ones that I came up that really struck me was, and there's one part towards the end where you're kind of navigating your past. If that's right, I'm trying to remember. Towards the end, before you get to Gigas here.
Talking about Magicant, or
probably, I think it might be Magicant, where you run into a snowman, and it's a memory of a snowman, or you're fighting almost against your demons to a certain extent. That's when this game really gets very interesting, and like you said, kind of goes the other side of the silly fun stuff when it gets a little more personal.
It almost enhances it in a way,
For sure.
I'm a big fan of, I guess, tragic comedy in a sense, and I guess in whatever the more comedy focused version of that is, because I think that's just more true of real life. Real life is funny. It's both funny and tragic, and I think if you're trying to capture that, which is, I think that's what good art does. It captures something about human life experience, not necessarily realistically, but in a comprehensive way. You're gonna have a mixture of that, and I think that snowman in Magicant is such a good example of that, actually, because he talks about how, you know, he melted one day and he's really insignificant, but you still remember him. Ness, the player, right. Or I guess just Ness, really. This is Ness's specific memory, still remembers him. You know, these, I mean, heck, this is the game that has an item called the insignificant item, which when used doesn't do anything really. Right. Not mechanically, but you're just given a message that says you have an experience only somebody who uses something insignificant could have, right? And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, like, you know, we are shaped even by those seemingly insignificant things because, you know, that's what it means to live and grow up, is to experience all these odd characters and things and hold on to them even as you grow and mature.
Just want to take a moment to thank my incredible, wonderful, smashing, and fantastic patrons. Thank you so much to Terry Kinnair, Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, Games with Coffee, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sergil of the All In podcast, and finally, Pete Harney. If you'd like to support the show financially, please go to patreon.com/a gamer looks at 4040. Check out the tiers. If anything appeals to your sense of generosity and philanthropy, then by all means, sign up today. And if not, a rating or review on your pod player of choice is also greatly appreciated. And tell a friend, tell two. That is the easiest way to spread the word of the show, and honestly, the best way of all. Let's jump back into the episode. In thinking about this episode series that was supposed to be one episode and turned into at least 4 of this recording, maybe 5 if I can get some other things in play, I really want to focus on people's stories. That's kind of what I do here. But I also want to be even-handed and approach some of the concepts and approach some of the aspects of Earthbound that may not be as positive. The number one of those is certainly gameplay. Now, even the most ardent, hardcore fan of Earthbound should probably admit, on an objective basis, Earthbound isn't the cleanest playing RPG on the planet. It's not the deepest system. It's not the most friendly to new players. There are some really good ideas, but there's also a decent amount of friction. So in this section of the episode, we are going to take an honest look at the gameplay of Earthbound and try not to only harp on the inventory system, which I think is widely understood as a bit of a pain. Starting us off on this section is gaming writer and podcaster Lucas White, followed by Michael K. Hughes, followed again by Mike Albertin, and then finishing off the first half of this with video game music producer Mustin. And for you, as someone who is a fan of RPGs or growing in your fandom of RPGs, how did you feel about the actual play of the game? Or even now too, right? Because we obviously can recollect now.
Yeah, it's funny. This is something I think I encountered a lot, especially with other people around my age, is like starting RPGs and inevitably hitting like the Pokemon and the Final Fantasy and stuff.
Right.
A sentiment I see a lot is like it's kind of weird and put me off because of the first person aspect of it. Like I didn't see my characters and it just kind of threw me off. And I think I kind of felt similarly at the time. But as I've gotten older and sort of broadened my horizons and everything, I ended up becoming like a really big fan of Dragon Quest.
Yep.
And then you look back from Dragon Quest to Earthbound, and it's like even more of those like alarm bells start going off. You're like, oh, that's what this is. It's also a like really heartfelt Dragon Quest homage.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. Absolutely. And even though the art style in Earthbound is very, very unique in its, again, suburban landscapes and depictions, there is still a little bit of that DNA in there as well. I could totally see that to a certain extent. Yeah, for sure. That's cool, man.
And I think like when you kind of get older and look at it again. And I think the things like the damage counter and stuff like that, and like the kooky status effects that would like mess with your controls outside of battle and stuff.
Oh God, that's
really fun.
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Your controls would go backwards, or you have to hold the controller upside down or something silly like that to navigate. Oh my gosh, that's right. I completely forgot about that.
You have to like stumble to the hospital, get the mushrooms.
Yeah, because you have to you have to go to the hospital and get. Oh man, that's a fun man. And that's one of the weird things about the game. I played this a few years ago for the first time. Again, kind of like what you were saying, the provenance of it. It's a beloved game, and I like Earthbound a lot. I don't love playing it. But again, that could be with just modern sensibilities, which is why I like talking to people who played it of the time. Hey, did you even notice the fact that you could only hold a certain amount of items in a backpack, and going back to Escargot Express all the time and going through all that inventory tax and gameplay tax that has been sanded off over the years, for me at least. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Not even registered,
Yeah, no, now that you mention that, I think at that time, a lot of that stuff just sort of washes over you. Like I remember inventory space being kind of annoying, but not in the same way of like gamer brain annoying, if that makes sense.
Sure, that's fair. I mean, that's totally fair. And plus you have when you're a kid, at least you have the player's guide there, right? Which they, of course, intentionally put in there so people can actually beat the game, because there's a lot of esoteric stuff in Earthbound, as we all know.
I have so much more patience. Like that's one thing that just I feel so hard playing. Like I still love RPGs, but there are some times I think like, how did I get through these games the way I did back then?
I like this as a must-play kind of game. Like, this is one of those formative, everyone should play Earthbound, but play it with a spoiler-free walkthrough.
Right. Everyone should at least try Earthbound.
Yeah, everyone should do, and just understand that the actual play of the game, for me, is a bit of a chore. It's a bit of a chore. How would you respond to that statement?
What specifically is the chore?
I think combat is very straightforward. Obviously, I don't think anyone would argue. I think a lot of the items and weapons are very esoteric. It's hard to decide, like, what does this thing do? Because you can't, when you're in battle, as far as I know, you can't look at an item and see what it does. You have to like back out into a menu and it gives you a description, unless you have the player's guide, of course.
Right.
And also the inventory management is just, I'm sorry, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. I'm sorry.
I'm currently playing Suikoden and inventory management, and that is identical to how it is in Earthbound. I was like, oh, geez. At least Earthbound prepared me for this.
No, see, I can't imagine. It's really, I don't know, short-sighted. And I think I know why they did it, right? Because it's about like this realistic thing. A kid can only have so much room in a backpack, right? So they can't be sloshing around with 85 megalixirs on their person and like you do in a Final Fantasy game. But boy, Escargot Express, back and forth, boy oh boy. I don't know.
Yeah, the inventory is definitely hard to defend. I don't know that I can. Because, yeah, you spend a lot of time calling your sister Tracy, like, hey, come pick up 3 of my items and charge me $18
right.
each time.
Right.
Combat is Dragon Warrior. Dragon Warrior set up that whole thing.
Fair.
I've also been playing Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and this is still a step above how absolutely basic that combat is. But you get, like, the magic spells, the PSI and whatnot. That's a nice mix. It's basically your supplement to magic that you would get in Final Fantasy.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the big things with Earthbound 2 is we'll talk about, story beats and just how wild and inventive it is, because it is endlessly inventive. And also going to talk about the ending, and I honestly think it's a very beautiful ending, and it ends great. Oh, Oh,
I guess
okay.
back to answer what you're originally.
Yes.
You wanted me to defend the gameplay, and I don't know that I can.
Okay.
Because I think it's the setting and the characters and the story that really hooked me, and like, I don't want to say suffering through the gameplay is what I did, but getting through it to see where you were going next and to see what was around the corner was the main pull.
Another really cool mechanic in the game is the hit point counter. When you get hit, it counts down your hit points, which gives you the opportunity to like throw a heal real fast before someone dies. I love that. I would love to see that in another game. And you, with your extensive knowledge of games, may know of something else that uses something like that. But boy, is that unique. I really, really dug that as part of the combat.
I can't think of anything off. I mean, Mother 3 does it, obviously, but
Yeah, right.
I would imagine anyone else that does it, they're just aping it straight out of Earthbound.
Yeah.
But you could even end battles as you're dying,
Yeah.
and it'll freeze wherever it is. Because on your way from Twoson to Happy Village, so you're talking about, there are these a-hole trees that when you kill them, they burst into flames, as the text puts it, and damage your entire party for a lot of damage. So my general tactic is to like jam through battle as quick as possible. So when it bursts into flames and everyone dies, I can get out before they actually pass out.
It's very, very interesting mechanic. Something I've always enjoyed about that game, for sure. But then I realized, oh, thank God I have a spoiler-free walkthrough, because I would not want to navigate, the desert on my
there's some
own,
really
or
complicated stuff in this game.
try to, yeah.
Doesn't this game have an item limit too? What you can carry?
Oh, it's just the worst.
That's a personal thing in RPGs that I can't stand, because I gather everything I can find and I hold on to everything I can find. And when you don't let me hold on to everything I can find, I'm upset.
But my problem with that, and that's a good segue to some of the things I don't like, and I think everyone who plays this game will admit that the inventory management is a bit of a nightmare. I agree with you. I don't like. It's kind of why like Resident Evil games are full of that, though, right?
Yes, but that's survival horror.
You have to fit things into your knapsack or briefcase.
I can live with that in that style. Like, I don't like it in those games either. But an RPG, it upsets me more, because an RPG is I will hoard things. And I want to be able to hoard things. Like, for example, Star Ocean, the second story for PS1, kind of obscure title, only lets you carry 20 of every item. And that stuck with me, and I haven't touched that game in over 15 years, or 20 years probably. And I still remember 20 of each item. And I think about playing it, but I don't want it. Only 20 items. Nope.
See, my problem with that is, especially, I understand what they're trying to do, right? They're kids, they only have a certain amount of space in their backpack. But the game is so abstracted everywhere else that this one little piece of inventory management, of friction, and having to go back and forth with Escargot Express or whatever it's called, and you have to go back and forth, and it's brutal. I honestly, it's one of the big things that I was very happy to have that walkthrough, because I didn't want to go through that, because not knowing what you have, and it's very hard to figure out what you have based off of menus. If you're in battle, you have 18
what things do.
Nothing. You can find out if you're in inventory mode, like just walking around. But if you're in battle and you want to use something, there is no indication of what these things are. You just no idea, and nothing. Everything's a joke. Everything's like a joke name or a joke item thing. So, again, I just found the act of playing it just lots of friction. Mention that side of it, because this game, as wonderful and creative it is, also has some mechanical issues in service to silliness, and not just silliness, but also to that real life thing. For example, Ness, if you don't talk to your mom after a certain period of time, you lose some stats. And let's say Ness misses his mom. That's an annoying thing from a gameplay perspective. It's like, I don't want to go back to a phone and find a phone and call my mom, but I get it from a story perspective. He's a kid who would want to connect with his mom as he's going on this adventure. And there's so many things like that in this game. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is, you definitely because there are some people that like that. You're saying that this is like a frustrating thing. When a dude would show up with his camera and say, make you take a picture of the fuzzy pickles.
Fuzzy pickles, yeah.
Some people would get really frustrated, but some people would be like, this is endearing. It's like, it is, charming, endearing is, I think, the goal. Like I said, it was, made by a weird kid for weird kids. And I think that those mechanics are, the story. It is trying to move along the story and the idea of a boy who's supposed to be able to save the world, with some weird kids and robot time travel. But overall, I think that with it being so quirky, it's kind of like I said before, that some things are silly on purpose, that it is frustrating. Yeah, why do you have to give your sister $18? But I mean, that's because that's real. So yes, it's cool to go to the ATM and then you can like buy bubblegum or whatever. But it's also cool, but not cool, that your sister extorts you, because that is very real if you have an older sister or even a younger sister who is really tough for being so small. But
starting off the second half of this gameplay conversation, we have Robert returning to the show, followed by Celeste of Another Zelda Podcast, Sam of Retro Logic, and finally Kyle VonKubick finishes off this gameplay section. I'd like to back up a little bit to some of the mechanical things I think this game does very successfully. One of which I've never seen in a game since, and I think I've never played the other Mother games, and I think that is the case, with the rolling hit point counter, where you can survive if it doesn't roll down to 0 fast enough, or you can... I think that is such a successful idea. I would love to see that in another game.
It would be great to see in another game. I think like I could see something like that in like a Fallout game where like, oh, well, he's poisoned or he's going to go down if you can help him.
Right.
That would work really well in something like that. But I'm playing Tactics Ogre, Tactics Ogre Knights of Lotus right now. And it has something, the rolling hit points are not there. However, they do have a thing where if your character has like a certain perk, basically, they're able to survive a critical hit. And so their health will stop at like 22 or something. And it's like, okay, well, that's not quite the Earthbound system, but it's pretty close.
Pretty close. I like that. Pretty close.
I'll take it.
Yeah, that'll work. I really, I think the game definitely mechanically. The only issue I have is I think most people would agree that the inventory system is pretty rough. What's your take on it, especially as someone who obviously really enjoys the themes and this kind of realistic idea? I can only hold so many things in my backpack, yet I'm in this surreal world where, things don't quite make sense.
I remember this is one of the first games where I really got into organization. So with Ness, I remember having all of the stat boosting extras that I could carry or whatever. Paula, I would give all the life and health related items. Jeff, I literally just kept him stocked with like one-use weapons and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I remember with Pooh, he was just kind of like the extra stuff. Like if I needed him to carry the wad of bills to give somebody, or like a story-based item, I would give it to Pooh. And I think that's how I kind of got around having the difficulty with it. But I do remember making the phone call and storing items and doing stuff like that and then having them delivered later. But I never ran into an issue where like I needed a specific item and I didn't have it on me.
I have to say I was ecstatic to learn that once you are super powerful, the enemies run away from you, or if you walk up to them and run into them, you automatically win. It's less than a second. about.
It's
like, you
wonderful.
win.
It's a great mechanic. Yes.
Yes, and I am not a fan. This might be a hot take. I am not a fan of games like, okay, so I want to love Quest 64, but I cannot stand invisible enemies. Some
Interesting.
people love it. Some people love it. I love that in Earthbound you can see where enemies are. For me, that helps my strategy of, okay, do I feel prepared? What can I do to avoid this enemy if I need to get into a building or something? And I also talk to every character. I would be the most boring human being to watch play a video game because I talk to them multiple times. I revisit them after certain scenarios have happened to see if they change their text. And Earthbound is full of gems of dialogue.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's extraordinary. It's one of the hallmarks of the game. And as I like to say, this game is just bursting with flavor. Like there's just so much flavor in this game. And I think of any RPG, this is the one that's worth poking at the edges, especially with NPCs, because they all feel very vibrant and alive.
Yes. I mean, a little mouse says this mouse loves you at one point. I mean,
I know.
A bad day. Oh, how cute is that? And so regarding the mechanics, though, the nuts and bolts, it can feel tedious. And I'm someone who the action is secondary to me in a video game compared to the story and the exploration. What about you? How is that for you?
I think if I had to pick between the two, I think it's more about being in the hands. However, I do love the idea of video games being a unique storytelling device. But for me, there's a little more value in things playing well, in my opinion. That's just me. And I love stories in games. I mean, my favorite franchises are like Fallout and BioShock. You know, and that's all and of course, those games are just, they can be rough to play, but boy, do I enjoy the interactions and just the way those games articulate. But my favorite game of all time is probably Mega Man X because it's just so fun in your hands. It just feels flawless. So I'm of both sides of it. But if I had to pick between the two, I'd probably pick play over story. But I do think they're both integral, especially the way Earthbound tackles their themes, which we'll definitely get into.
Now you're making me think that if both of us were given GoldenEye 64, we would be playing it very differently. Because as a child, I was like, I got to explore this silo. I got to explore everything. Oh, there's a bad guy. I'm just going to get him out of the way so I can continue exploring. I don't... The mission, I was so slow with the mission. I would be the worst agent ever. I'd be like, ooh, what's over here? Oh, what's over here?
And I'm like, the watch tells me to put the modem on the thing, and I got to do that and get through it. It's definitely different. And again, as I've gotten older too, I think I appreciate more exploration and poking at the edges. Again, that's why I love Fallout, or Fallout New Vegas specifically, because it just rewards you exploring, right? That's why Breath of the Wild is a genius experience, because it always rewards your exploration. It's constantly giving you gamer treats, and I love me some gamer treats, and the best games reward that. And I think in Earthbound, going back to that dialogue is a big part of it. Like, you know, you're going to get either something useful or humorous or personal or emotional. You're going to get something of substance from every interaction, it feels like.
Oh, yes. And so I'm not sure if this is going to be your next question, but I could speak to a little bit more about my introduction with Earthbound.
Go for it. Yes, please.
So I was not good at it. I was not good at it. I mean, I was used to fighting games and Mario games, which not that those are simplistic by any means, but I just was like, okay, I'm walking around. I have to fight this thing, but instead of actually seeing my character fight, I have to select the action. And it took me a little while. Like, I really did not get far at all in that game as a child. I got to maybe, like the sharks area with the gang at the arcade. And I was running out of food and supplies. But at that time, I didn't understand the concept of an ATM. And and it also, I didn't have a guide with it. And
why would you? Yeah.
I didn't realize that every time you defeated an enemy, you received money. I think your dad was paying you or something, or he'd say, I put some money in your account. But I didn't understand like what withdraw and deposit meant with an ATM. So the banking system got me. As a child, I could not progress very far in Earthbound as a child because I did not understand how an ATM worked.
And Earthbound at the very beginning of the game, even as it's just a modern player, it's challenging. Like it's not an easy game, Earthbound. So I can absolutely see somebody picking it up from a rental store, banging their head against the wall for a weekend and saying, I don't know how to get through this. Which it must have been a weird dissonance for you because you really loved the visual and you kind of connected with the character of Ness. And, you know, he's hanging out with his friends and they're doing goofy kid things and laughing at silly kid things. And I can see that connection, but being like, wow, I cannot beat this one guy.
No.
At the back of the arcade. Yeah.
And you might remember this from the game, but whenever you would fight crows, one of their attacks would say something like, the crow pecked at Ness's eye. And that kind of scared me as a kid, you know?
Yeah.
Like, even though you don't see anything and Ness doesn't go blind, I mean, when you're reading that, you're thinking, holy moly, what is this?
Yeah, that's it. A lot of this game has those, I don't say dark undertones, but it definitely, you know, as we, of course, you progress through the game, the themes become very apparent and, you know, I think actually very stunning and beautiful. But especially at the outset, you know, you're taking this game on its face like, oh, this fun little game where I'm a kid walking around adventures and then crows attacking eyes. You're like, oh boy,
Yes.
I could see that being really scary.
It is, yeah. And especially you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm just reading. Why can't I just swing a sword or something?
I can't just jump over this person. Why can't I just jump? It's Mario, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And yes, so it's definitely a strategy game. And I was like, oh, I'm having to imagine that Ness is swinging the bat.
Right. Because you can't even see the characters.
No.
Yeah. That is an interesting piece of it, right? Because you're probably used to seeing your character doing action. You're now embodying a character and you're not seeing this thing happen. I can definitely see that being a weird shift, especially if you're not used to role-playing games. But even then, you know, Final Fantasy 4 and 6, they had characters swinging swords. You could see them doing the motions. Yeah, I can definitely see that being a weird thing.
Mm-hmm. And I picked it up again when it was on the Wii U and the virtual console store, virtual shop in 2015. And I vividly remember playing it because I was so excited. Like, okay, finally, now that I understand how an ATM works, I'm going to beat this game. And I've done plays locally before. I've done a few plays. And at the time I was in Arsenic in Old Lace at a local community theater. And I'd play Earthbound after rehearsals or on my off nights. And I could not wait to complete this game. And I think it was starman.net that got me through this game, my little player's guide.
Yes, starman.net is so useful. It's such a compendium. And it really speaks to the game's legacy that there is this entire site just dedicated to Earthbound and mother games, basically.
Yes, it was a lifesaver. I would not have beaten the game without that website.
I found a spoiler-free walkthrough, and that is what I used, and it was great.
Yeah, and it's difficulty is something that's on my mind a lot. I've talked about it a lot in different places. Because I am an advocate for like challenging games. I think games are most fun when they're challenging. But I also realize like nobody likes to be frustrated. And like if a game's too hard, it's frustrating and you're going to quit. Like that's just how it is. And so it's such a delicate balance to have a game that's, you know, tough but fair, right?
Yeah, and that's the key, fair. And that fairness is exactly right. And going back to Mega Man X, that game is fair. I mean, it's hard. There's really challenging parts of that game. But every win and failure feels earned. Like, okay, I messed up somewhere. How do I improve on that? Not the game cheated me out of a life because XYZ happened. It's extraordinarily fair. And I had a long conversation with early on in this podcast with somebody where we were talking about challenge, and it was surrounding Metroid Dread, which is a game I don't love. And it's challenge, of course, was a big deal with that game. Like everyone, oh, it's extremely hard. You know, that was a big part of the discourse. And my guest very astutely said, challenge is a hard thing because it's very subjective. Like what's hard for you may not be hard for me. And if we're going to start getting into the conversation about like difficulty levels and if you should have levels, it's very hard for challenge to be a one size fits all thing. So it's kind of interesting what you're saying about games being hard, it's like, well, what does that kind of mean in depending on the experience you're doing?
Well, and that's one of the things I've said about RPGs as a genre is very interesting. Is they kind of have a self-correcting difficulty curve, where if the game's too hard, you can level grind, because level grinding is not hard. It takes time, but it's not hard. The only parts of an RPG that can truly be hard are the very beginning and the very end. When you haven't leveled up at all yet, and when you are at the level cap.
Yep. And Earthbound's a good example. Early on, that game's not easy. And until you get some, I remember having to really grind out those early dungeons and build up because I kept getting wrecked by rats.
Usually the only places I will grind once when every party member becomes available. That's usually what I'll do on each playthrough.
That makes sense.
And really with Pooh, it's optional, but I prefer to do it just so that he will actually stay alive through those dungeons. You can probably go through without him.
Probably,
if the rest of your party's strong. I have, for whatever reason, taken to actually grinding for the T-Rex bat when as Jeff, if you're familiar with that challenge.
I don't think I am.
So in the Winters General Store, there is equipment for sale, namely the T-Rex bat. Of course, you're playing as Jeff at this point. He does not have an ATM card. So the only way to acquire the money for the T-Rex bat while you're in Winters as Jeff, you could, of course, go buy it when you acquire Teleport, but by that point, you have access to better equipment. But if you, as Jeff, you can earn enough money by fighting crows, dogs, and goats and selling the cookies and bread rolls that they drop. It takes a while. It takes a while.
Yeah.
It's not really worth it. I just kind of, I don't know. I did it once and I was like, whatever. I love this game. It's an excuse to play Earthbound longer.
Why not?
Even though it's kind of just tedious and boring. But I mean, I usually grind for the Sword of Kings too. I won't do it for the other 1 in 128 items, but I'll do it for the Sword of Kings just because it bothers me to see Pooh have no weapon equipped.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's kind of, that's a tough
but if
part
you,
of it.
If you
That's
do get the
interesting.
T-Rex bat, it's like better than like the next bat you could buy. It's better.
Okay.
It's better
There you
than
go.
what you can. I think it's better than what you can buy in the Dusty Dunes Desert Store and in Forsyth Department Store.
Okay.
So it doesn't become obsolete until you reach Summers, I don't think.
Gotcha. Interesting. No, that's really cool. I like that. That little gameplay conceit where you could actually get that.
There's
early. I love when
people who
games
try
let
to
you do
buy
that.
the house in Own It before leaving.
Oh my god!
I always just come back because you can do that.
Yeah, right.
You can come back
Yeah,
at
fair.
a point when the money you need for it's not even all that relevant.
My favorite mechanics or ideas is that if Ness doesn't call his mom, there are stats that drop
Right.
after a little bit of time. That's really cool. Now, if I'm not by a phone and I can't call her and my stats drop and that stinks.
Sure.
That's not mechanically fun at all.
Yeah.
But I love the idea behind it.
Right.
You know, even like the dad, like you said, he's not there, but he's always going to throw money into your account like an absent dad might do.
Right.
Right. Replacing his presence. So yeah, all the mechanical stuff cements theme, but boy, oh boy, it can be a bear to play sometimes in certain points.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the discussion about wanting to make games, right? You have Mr. Itoy getting involved with Nintendo. This is a copywriter. And I can only imagine, because I've never actually talked to the man, but he just saw this as another medium for him to work in. And there wasn't well, you don't do it like that because we just released, 4 different RPGs and they sold X amount of dollars and this is what works and this is the formula. It's, I want to do these strange and creative things because I'm a strange and creative dude. So adding in calling my mom because I'm 8 in the game or 10 or however old Ness is makes sense to the character, but for a gameplay, for a player, yes, it can be a point of frustration.
Yeah, I totally get that. And that, again, that is again, I'll always sacrifice mechanic for story, although I highly value play. So it's a weird dichotomy for me. It's always a weird push and pull. For me, play is everything. It's a game, we play it, right? That's usually pretty primary. But when a game is trying to do something as adventurous and innovative as Earthbound, I'll sacrifice that a bit because I know what the game is trying to do and I appreciate it. So yeah, it was a bear to play sometimes, but again, it was always worth it in the end. And finally, as we close out this episode of our run through Earthbound, we're going to tackle some random topics, mini omnibus, just kind of getting some interesting thoughts and opinions out of the way before we dive into next week's episode, which is going to be a doozy. Michael K. Hughes returns to talk about some of Earthbound's more interesting design choices and music. Sam discusses the environment of Earthbound, some interesting hacks, and how Earthbound is really a representative of an outside view of America. And then finally, Dan finishes off the show talking a bit about casual gamer control. The one thing I've always heard about, and it makes sense, is that it feels like a commentary on American life through the eyes of a Japanese developer, which is really interesting and cool. I think because it does have this very bright, cheery, but somewhat plastic feel to it, you know? And of course, the citizens of this world are as snarky and as, I don't say snarky, but they have a certain way about them that's interesting and unique.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is present in the Japanese version and how much of it was introduced in the translation.
Interesting.
Because, like, we have a bunch of Beatles references for some reason.
Yes.
Entirely too many.
Yes, very weird.
I mean, the music would have carried over, because when you stay at the inn, you get the good morning to you notes. And then when you're in Dungeon Man, he's got a yellow submarine on display. So I wonder how much of that was, like, intentional in the Japanese version. Strange. Of all things to pick, you pick the Beatles.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, the Beatles are kind of a ubiquitous thing, but that's true because it is also a very American thing, you know. Now, a big thing, of course, in Earthbound, though, which is, again, one of its most celebrated things, is the amount of flavor, are the characters and the environments. Do you have any particular environments or areas that really strike you as either just something you absolutely adore or meaningful even? Like, wow, I connect with this area or this group of people or these characters. Anything like that wrapping around in Earthbound?
Saturn Valley, probably.
Okay.
Just everything about Saturn. Just it's just when the game gets as weird as it can get. The whole four-side sequence is probably my favorite part of the game. That is where you go back to the Dusty Dunes Desert. You go to the Dusty Dunes Gold Mine. That's when you get the 5 third strongest moles. That is my username. And I'm sticking through that.
Love it.
But I mean, that's also when you get Moonside, which is maybe the actual weirdest part of the game, now that I think about it. I think Foresight is where the game really takes off. And I do find, too, it's something I've noticed more on my most recent playthroughs, that the game actually gets a lot less silly after Foresight. Like, it starts to kind of lean into the actual plot, kind of setting up Gygas as a real threat and going into some of that as well. I mean, there's still plenty of quirkiness, but I feel like it kind of hits its peak around Threed and Fourside, and then kind of gets you into the more straightforward, there is this alien menace that's taking over and you need to stop him.
I really, Moonside is probably one of my favorite environments. Something about the twisting things on its end, the visual style of it, all that neon. I absolutely love Moonside. It's probably one of my favorite environments as well. The one area that really struck me when I was playing it and kind of turned me into, oh, this is fun and quirky, into, ooh, I think I'm really going to like this, was, I think it's Happy Town with all the cult members in blue hoods.
Mm-hmm.
Something about that struck me as eerie and strange and really, really cool. And at that point, I was like, okay, I think I see what this game is trying to do, and I'm really, really here for it. Also, I gotta say, just mechanically, Bottle Rocket's so overpowered, and I'm so glad I learned that early, because man, that just really takes the friction out of a lot of the encounters. Just Bottle Rocket away, and you can get those relatively easily.
Yeah, I'm not above using bottle rockets. I'll usually just save them for the tougher encounters. The one thing I decided I can't do is the rock candy glitch. That just that becomes absurd.
I don't think I know that one. What's the rock candy glitch?
I think you have to eat it in battle, but if you eat rock candy with a condiment, you actually don't eat the rock candy. And rock candy is an item that gives a random stat increase permanently.
Oh, permanently.
So if you load up on sugar packets are preferable because they will actually double the effectiveness of the rock candy. And get into a battle and eat rock candy while in battle. I think you have to have a full inventory or something like that too. There's some additional condition, but basically you can use infinite rock candies that way. So I did it once. It was after Pooh joined. I buffed all because he's the lowest level party member always.
Yes.
And I buffed his stats like so high that like he had more everything than everyone else. It was insane. But yeah, that's the thing I usually won't do. That can actually come back to bite you, by the way. If you raise your stats too high, you actually can roll them back over the maximum value that the game
really
allows. Yeah.
Oh wow.
I haven't had that happen, but if you go absolutely absurd with it. Another thing I've been warned about, I've never done it myself. If you grind extremely hard, like say you have really bad luck and you really want the Sword of Kings, and you grind levels in Stonehenge forever, after you clear Magicant, Ness gets a bunch of stat increases. If you've already capped his level, you will not benefit from those stat increases because of the way things work in Earthbound.
How funny.
Because stats like Vitality actually just make you get more HP on your next level up. So if you get a huge Vitality increase after clearing Magicant, you won't actually ever see that HP if you're already level 99. But I don't think I've ever hit the level cap in Earthbound.
That would be a lot. That's a lot of grinding.
It's a lot. I mean, I guess I could see it. If you grind for the Gutsy Bat at the end of the game, and you have bad luck, but you're dedicated to doing it. The thing is, it was my most recent playthrough, actually. I got the Gutsy Bat on literally the first Bionic Kraken I fought on that file. And I was kind of mad because I was prepared to finish the game, and I was like, well, I have to go back to the Phase Distorter and save now so that this is, recorded. So that is my file where I have both the Gutsy Bat and the Sword of Kings. Earthbound gets called a parody. That word has never felt right to me at all because it's too sincere to be a parody.
Yeah, that's fair.
But just other like another game I discovered much later was Metal Wolf Chaos, and that is the game which has a president of the United States of America getting in mecha battles with his traitorous vice president, and everything is justified by because I'm the president of the United States of America. It's great.
Nice, nice, lovely. It's good. That kind of little commentary is fun. I like that though. I kind of like that idea though. Like this is kind of what it looks like from the outside looking in. Again, kind of, the initial areas are very, very suburban. and most people, I'll say most people, but especially a lot of kids kind of grew up in that like suburban area. You had your neighborhood friends and you had little stores and this abstraction of a very real thing. Because again, role-playing games up to that point were all fantasy-based, right? It's Dungeons and Dragons and swords and shields and wizards. This felt set in a place that I think someone of that era or a kid of that era would identify with immediately. Got my neighborhood friends. We talk about farts, where it's, and that groundwork is so fertile for other things to spring from it. It's so cool in that regard. Yeah, it's really very rich, I thought, and I really latched onto that quite a bit, even just as an old guy playing for the first time 2 years ago.
Hey, I do got one thing more to add about how I feel the game was meant for a more casual audience. Let me ask you something. Mm-hmm. How when you played it, like what did you play it on? Like
I played it on an emulator, yeah.
So the game, most games like that, you would press A to like select everything, right? This game, if you've noticed, it's the L button is the more is the main button. I don't know if that registered on an emulator, but when you're playing on the Super Nintendo on the controller, it's that L shoulder trigger button, right? And so you could play most of the game with just holding the controller in your left hand, moving around with the control pad and using L to like select stuff. And the reason is so that you could play the game with one hand while eating pizza with your other hand. Like they literally designed it that way.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
That's an actual thing?
That's an actual thing.
I love that. That's so funny. Yeah,
they were definitely targeting not the main RPG audience of the time.
That's fantastic. I had no idea. That's really funny. Yeah. That's really good. Wow, way to think ahead. I love it. Talk about accessibility.
Yeah, right?
For a hungry gamer. That's really great. I love that. And that just about does it for part 2 of Earthbound Month. A little hour-long snack, a little appetizer between the big first episode and what promises to be an even bigger third part. Next week, we're going to talk about characters, story, themes, all the deep fun stuff that Earthbound presents. It's going to be a series of really interesting conversations. I am really looking forward to sharing them with you, and I do hope you come back next week to continue our journey. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If this is your first time here, welcome. We have 100 other episodes back in the archives covering games and systems and themes from all over the landscape. Check it out, dive in, and become a friend of the show. As always, thanks very much to Kev from the Discord and Pete Harney for editing the interviews. Big thank you to my guests for taking the time out of their busy schedules to chat with me about Earthbound. And finally, thank you to you for spending your time with A Gamer Looks at 40. There are a million things you could do, listen, watch, play, etc. You chose this for an hour. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, call your mom. Maybe your stats could use a boost as well.